The mid-morning sun poured its golden glow over the sleek Monterey Sky Terminal, its glass facade shimmering like a crystal against the blue sky. Luxury cars, black sedans and polished limousines lined up like silent sentinels in the parking lot, their surfaces gleaming. Inside, the terminal was alive with quiet opulence. Elegant passengers moved about, their voices soft and refined, blending with the distant hum of private jet engines. Stepping out of her sleek black sedan was Dr. Celeste Parker, a woman whose presence exuded both power and calm. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the pristine pavement, each step measured and deliberate. Dressed in a tailored navy blazer and a pale ivory silk blouse, she carried herself with quiet authority. Her hair, swept neatly into a low chignon, shimmered in the sunlight, a small halo of poise and determination. She didn't need to demand respect. Her demeanor commanded it effortlessly. Pulling her black leather carry-on behind her, Celeste approached the terminal doors. They slid open with a soft hiss, welcoming her into an environment designed for luxury and privilege. The marble floors beneath her feet glistened like water, while the plush seating and muted scent of coffee and leather whispered refinement. It was the kind of space built for society's elite, a world Celeste had earned her way into through relentless effort and unparalleled brilliance. At the check-in counter, a sharply dressed attendant offered a professional smile. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I assist you today?" "Good morning," Celeste replied, her voice smooth and assured. "Dr. Celeste Parker. I have a reservation for a private flight to Lakefield City." The attendant's fingers flew over the keyboard, her brows knitting together briefly before she looked back up, her smile widening. "Yes, Dr. Parker. Everything is in order. Your jet is ready and the crew is preparing for boarding as we speak. If you'd like, you can relax in the VIP lounge or I can escort you directly to the gate." "I'll head straight to the jet," Celeste said with a brief polite nod. "Certainly, ma'am. Gate 7, just beyond the lounge. Have a wonderful flight." With a quiet, confident, "Thank you," Celeste turned and began her walk toward the designated gate. Her footsteps were soft against the plush carpet, but the air around her hummed with her presence. As the hallway transitioned to sleek tile floors, Gate 7 came into view, the jet waiting outside gleaming like a silver jewel under the cloudless sky. Standing by the entrance to the stairs was a tall, imposing figure, a man whose stiff posture and sharp uniform clearly marked him as the flight captain. Captain Julian Matthews carried the air of someone accustomed to authority, and his cool expression hardened slightly as he noticed Celeste approaching. Celeste offered him a polite, professional smile. "Good morning," she said, her tone even and composed. The captain's eyes narrowed slightly, his lips curling into a faint smirk. His tone was clipped, disinterested. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'm here for the flight to Lakefield City," Celeste said calmly, ignoring the undertones of dismissal in his voice. Captain Matthews glanced pointedly at her sleek suitcase and back to her, as though searching for something. Doubt, perhaps. "This is a private flight, ma'am," he said, emphasizing the word private as though she couldn't possibly belong there. "I believe you're at the wrong gate." Celeste raised an eyebrow, though her poise never wavered. "This is Gate 7, isn't it?" "It is," the captain replied, folding his arms across his chest. "But again, this jet isn't for public passengers. It's reserved for private clients." The slight sneer in his tone was impossible to miss, though poorly masked by formality. "I'm aware," Celeste replied smoothly, refusing to let his words provoke her. "I am the private client." Captain Matthews let out a low, disbelieving chuckle and shook his head. "Look, ma'am, I don't know what you've been told, but this isn't some flight you book on a whim. Perhaps try the commercial terminal. They'll help you sort things out." Celeste's fingers tightened slightly around the handle of her suitcase, though her expression remained serene and composed. Before she could reply, another voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Both Celeste and Captain Matthews turned to see a flight attendant approaching. Claire Harmon, a young woman in a crisp navy uniform, a clipboard tucked neatly under her arm. Claire glanced between Celeste and the captain, her brows furrowed in mild confusion. "Just a bit of misunderstanding," Captain Matthews said with an air of dismissal, jerking his chin toward Celeste. "She thinks she's on this flight." The flight attendant's gaze lingered on Dr. Celeste Parker for just a second too long, her eyes flicking over Celeste's sharp heels, designer carry-on, and perfectly tailored blazer. Doubt flashed briefly across her expression before she carefully neutralized it, her voice measured but edged with skepticism. "Ma'am," the attendant said, her tone a professional mask, "do you have documentation for this flight, a reservation or confirmation number?" Celeste's expression remained poised as she reached into her sleek leather bag. With a few precise taps on her phone, she retrieved the confirmation email and handed it to the attendant. The woman's eyebrows arched slightly as she scanned the screen, the surprise flickering on her face so briefly that it might have been missed. She quickly handed the phone back, smoothing her features. "Everything appears to be in order, Dr. Parker. I'll notify the crew that we're ready to board." The captain, Julian Matthews, stood nearby, his face stony and unreadable, though the slight twitch in his jaw betrayed his displeasure. Wordlessly, he stepped aside, as though physically clearing her path was more effort than it should have been. "Thank you," Celeste said evenly, her voice calm but firm. She began walking toward the waiting jet, the captain's lingering stare burning into her back like a challenge. Celeste took a deep breath as she approached the stairs leading up to the jet. The unspoken judgment followed her like a shadow, the weight of assumptions hanging in the air. She refused to let it shake her. With her head held high and her posture unwavering, she climbed the steps, each step a quiet act of defiance against the expectations thrust upon her. The moment she stepped into the jet's cabin, the tension outside faded into silence. The space was immaculate and luxurious. Rows of plush leather seats in soft, elegant tones, polished mahogany paneling glowing beneath the warm recessed lighting, and an arrangement of fresh lilies on the dining table. The faint scent of citrus mingled with the flowers, a quiet hint of care and refinement. It was a space that embodied excellence, efficiency, and elegance woven together, and Celeste allowed herself a brief pause to take it in. This jet wasn't just a luxury, it was a tangible symbol of the hard work and vision that had defined her career. But the quiet moment was short-lived. The soft scrape of shoes against the carpet announced the presence of Captain Matthews, who had followed her on board. His posture was stiff, his face betraying visible irritation as he stepped into the cabin. Behind him, the flight attendant, whose name badge read Kara Weston, whispered hurriedly to a younger crew member, though her lowered voice still carried enough for Celeste to catch. "She doesn't belong here," Kara muttered, her tone sharp with disdain. Celeste's hand paused mid-movement, resting lightly on the back of a nearby seat. Slowly, she turned, her gaze locking onto Kara with unsettling calm. The flight attendant's face paled, her cheeks flushing crimson as her eyes darted to the floor. Captain Matthews stepped forward, his voice clipped and overly formal. "Dr. Parker, I'm afraid there's been a mistake," he said, though the words sounded more like an accusation than an apology. "This flight was chartered under very specific arrangements, and while I'd love to accommodate you, we have to follow protocol." Celeste straightened fully, turning to face him with an air of quiet authority. "I'm fully aware of the arrangements, Captain Matthews," she said, her voice even but unyielding. "I'm the one who made them." Her words struck like a carefully aimed blow. The captain blinked, his composure faltering for the first time. "With all due respect, ma'am," he began, clearly scrambling to regain his footing. "This is a highly exclusive flight. Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Celeste interrupted, her voice cutting through his excuse like a blade. "By whom? The aviation department at Parker Holdings? Or perhaps the executive team that oversees this jet?" Captain Matthews' face froze, his confidence visibly cracking. "Parker Holdings. That's correct," Celeste said firmly, folding her arms across her chest. "The holding company that owns this jet. My company." The cabin fell into a thick silence, the hum of the engines the only sound in the air. Kara's clipboard slipped slightly in her hand, and she stepped forward, her voice tight and tinged with poorly disguised nervousness. "Ma'am, we weren't given any indication that the owner would be joining this flight," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Celeste's gaze hardened. "So you assumed," she said sharply, cutting through Kara's attempt at diplomacy. "You assumed I didn't belong here." Kara's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her face pale as she fumbled for a response. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Celeste pressed, her tone cool but unrelenting. "Because from the moment I stepped into this terminal, I've been met with nothing but skepticism and condescension. If it wasn't about my appearance, then what exactly was it about?" Neither Captain Matthews nor Kara seemed able to find an answer. The younger crew member stood behind them, staring fixedly at the carpet as though willing the tension away. Celeste let her words linger, the silence hanging thick and heavy between them. Finally she spoke again, her tone calm but pointed. "It's remarkable how quickly you dismissed me. You saw a black woman approach this jet, and instead of verifying the facts, you assumed I couldn't possibly be the person in charge." Captain Matthews shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze, while Kara's face reddened further, her lips pressed tightly together. Celeste straightened, her calm demeanor somehow more commanding than raised voices ever could be. "You've made your assumptions perfectly clear," she said evenly. "But here's the reality. I own this jet, and I expect to be treated with the same respect you would give anyone else. Do I make myself clear?" Captain Matthews opened his mouth as if to interject, but Celeste raised a hand sharply, stopping him mid-breath. "I don't need to hear your excuses," she said firmly, her tone brooking no argument. She turned her gaze toward Kara, narrowing her eyes. "And you," Celeste continued, her words deliberate and cutting. "You mocked me in front of others. You looked at me and decided I was invisible, unworthy of basic respect. Is that how you choose to represent this company?" "No, ma'am," Kara stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to get caught," Celeste interjected sharply. "Let's be clear about that." Captain Matthews, sensing the gravity of the situation, stepped forward, hands slightly raised in a half-hearted attempt to salvage control. "Dr. Parker, if I may," he began, his voice adopting a polished tone of damage control. "We deeply regret any misunderstanding. This is, of course, a learning opportunity, and I assure you we'll ensure it never happens again." Celeste's expression didn't waver. Her eyes flicked to him, her gaze unreadable but piercing. "A learning opportunity?" she repeated, the disbelief heavy in her voice. "You're mistaken if you think this is a moment for reflection. This is a moment for accountability." The room seemed to shrink under her authority. Without another word, Celeste turned toward the cabin door, her movements calm but deliberate. She reached into her bag, retrieved her phone, and made a quick call. "Yes, this is Dr. Celeste Parker," she said smoothly, her tone controlled but decisive. "I need the terminal manager at Gate 7 immediately. There's been an incident with the crew of my jet that I intend to address before departure." The crew exchanged nervous glances, their earlier confidence unraveling thread by thread. Captain Matthews shifted, his shoulders rigid, while Kara looked visibly paler, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her clipboard. Mason said nothing, his posture shrinking as he quietly observed the fallout. Ending the call, Celeste turned back to face the crew. "I've worked too hard and come too far to tolerate this kind of behavior," she said, her voice resolute. "You've made your assumptions about me abundantly clear. Now allow me to make something clear to you. This kind of prejudice has no place in my company." The cabin fell silent again, her words settling like heavy stones in the room. The hum of the jet's air conditioning became the only audible sound. Celeste didn't look at them again as she turned, her heels clicking softly against the thick carpet. She moved to one of the luxurious leather seats and sat down gracefully, her posture as composed as ever. Retrieving her tablet, she opened a document and began reviewing it, her fingers gliding effortlessly across the screen. To the crew, it appeared as though she had dismissed them entirely. But every movement was deliberate. Celeste wanted them to sit with what they had done, to feel the weight of their actions and assumptions. Minutes passed like hours. The tense silence pressed in on the crew as they stood awkwardly near the door. Captain Matthews occasionally exchanged glances with Kara, their discomfort etched clearly on their faces. Mason, still silent, shifted on his feet, his expression unsure. Then, the quiet was broken by hurried footsteps outside the jet. Moments later, the terminal manager appeared at the doorway, his face flushed from exertion and tension. He was a tall man in his early 40s, dressed impeccably in a navy suit, though the midday heat had clearly taken its toll. His expression was a mix of urgency and dread as his eyes flickered nervously between Celeste and the crew. "Dr. Parker," he said with a deferential nod, stepping into the cabin. "I came as quickly as I could. I deeply apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced." Celeste looked up from her tablet, her gaze steady and unflinching. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Rowland," she said, her tone cool but polite. "I trust you've been briefed?" The terminal manager hesitated, then nodded. "I was informed there was an issue with the crew." Celeste gestured toward Captain Matthews and his team with a pointed glance. "Then I suggest you start by addressing their behavior," she said evenly. "From the moment I arrived, I've been met with nothing but condescension, skepticism, and blatant disrespect." The crew visibly tensed as Mr. Rowland turned to them, his expression hardening. "Is this true?" he asked sharply, though the evidence already hung thick in the air. Captain Matthews cleared his throat awkwardly. "There was a misunderstanding," he mumbled, his voice a faint echo of the authority he once carried. "A misunderstanding," Celeste repeated, her words dripping with quiet disbelief. "You mean you dismissed me without bothering to check the facts? You humiliated me, the owner of this jet, because you assumed I couldn't possibly be in charge." Kara opened her mouth, but no words came. Mr. Rowland looked back at Celeste, his tone turning apologetic. "Dr. Parker, rest assured we take these matters very seriously. I'll handle the situation appropriately." Celeste's gaze remained fixed and unyielding, the calm in her tone underlined by an edge of authority. "I'm sure it will," she said quietly, but there was no mistaking the steel in her voice. "But let's be clear. This isn't just about me. This behavior didn't come out of nowhere. It's a symptom of a much larger problem, one that I will not allow to continue under any circumstances." Mr. Reeve nodded quickly, the movement almost eager in its agreement. "Absolutely, ma'am. We will implement whatever measures you deem necessary." Celeste's expression hardened. "I've already taken action," she said firmly. She turned her attention to Captain Matthews and Kara, both of whom stood ashen-faced by the cabin door. "Effective immediately, Captain Matthews and Miss Weston are relieved of their duties. They will no longer represent my company or its values." The blood drained from Matthews's face, his expression one of disbelief. Kara let out a small gasp, her clipboard trembling in her hands. "Dr. Parker, please," Matthews began, desperation creeping into his voice. "I've been with this company for years. This was an honest mistake." "An honest mistake?" Celeste repeated coldly. Her calm demeanor only magnified the weight of her words. "You humiliated me in front of a crowd. You dismissed me without even bothering to verify who I was. That wasn't a mistake, Captain. It was a choice, and it speaks volumes about your character." Kara finally stepped forward, her voice shaking as she clutched her hands tightly together. "Dr. Parker, I truly didn't mean any harm," she stammered. Her words rushed and uneven. You were just perpetuating the same bias that's plagued people like me for generations," Celeste cut in sharply, her tone still steady but unforgiving. "Your intentions don't matter, Miss Weston. Your actions do. And actions have consequences." Tears welled in Kara's eyes, but Celeste's expression remained resolute. She turned back to Mr. Reeve, who stood rigidly in place, clearly aware of the magnitude of the moment. "Ensure their termination is processed immediately," Celeste instructed, her voice leaving no room for argument. "And make it clear to the rest of the staff that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated." Mr. Reeve nodded solemnly, his tone firm. "It will be done, Dr. Parker. I'll personally oversee the matter." Satisfied, Celeste collected her tablet and turned toward the cabin door. As she passed the now silent crew, she paused for a final moment, letting her gaze sweep over them. "Let this be a lesson," she said, her voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of finality. "Respect isn't optional. It's a requirement. When you fail to meet that standard, you'll find there's no place for you here." With that, she descended the steps of the jet, leaving the crew and Mr. Reeve behind. The warm sunlight greeted her as she reached the tarmac, the day as bright and golden as when she had arrived. But this time, there was a weight lifted from her shoulders, a sense of clarity and purpose in having stood her ground. As Celeste climbed into the back seat of her waiting car, she allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She knew the battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. Prejudice was a deeply rooted issue, one that wouldn't be erased by a single confrontation. But today, she had made her mark, and she would continue to do so, one battle at a time. The soft hum of the luxury car's engine filled the air as the vehicle pulled away from the jet. Celeste leaned back against the leather seat, the sunlit tarmac blurring through the tinted window. Her thoughts replayed the confrontation, every word and every decision, a deliberate reminder that standing up for herself meant standing up for something much larger. The car glided smoothly down the quiet stretch of road as Dr. Celeste Parker leaned back in her seat. The hum of the engine, a welcome reprieve from the tension of the earlier confrontation. Her phone rested lightly in her hand, its cool surface grounding her as she stared out the window. Towering trees framed the road, their leaves catching the afternoon sun, casting shifting shadows over the pavement. Her phone buzzed again, vibrating softly against her palm. The name Rachel Monroe appeared on the screen, her executive assistant and closest confidant. Rachel, always one step ahead, was undoubtedly checking in. Celeste exhaled lightly, a mix of fatigue and resolve before answering the call. "I heard," Rachel said immediately, her voice carrying a blend of concern and curiosity. "Alan called my office about 15 minutes ago. Sounded like he was panicking. Everything okay?" Celeste traced the edge of the phone absently with her fingertips. "I handled it," she replied evenly, though the weight of the morning still lingered in her tone. Rachel let out a small, knowing hum. "Handled, huh? I'm guessing you didn't let it slide." Celeste allowed a faint smile to cross her lips. They needed to be reminded who they were dealing with. "Well," Rachel said, her tone softening slightly, "it's a good thing they learned that lesson. You didn't let this pass, and you shouldn't have." "It wasn't just about me," Celeste replied, her voice quiet but reflective as her gaze drifted to the distant skyline. "It's about what it represents. If they can dismiss me, someone with power and influence, how many others have they humiliated? People who don't have the position or voice to fight back." The line fell silent for a moment before Rachel spoke again, her voice gentle. "You're right, as always. What's the next step?" "I've already ordered a full review of the company's hiring and training practices," Celeste said firmly, her thoughts aligning into action as she spoke. "But that's only the start. This isn't the first time I've seen behavior like this in the aviation industry, and it won't be the last. It's time to do more than react." There was a pause on Rachel's end. Then her voice returned, steady and practical. "You're thinking about making this public, aren't you?" Celeste's gaze shifted to the horizon, where the city skyline shimmered faintly in the afternoon heat. "I am," she admitted. "Not to make it about me personally, but to highlight the bigger picture. People need to know these things are still happening. Even in places that claim to value equality and progress, bias runs deep. It's time for a broader conversation." Rachel's tone turned decisive. "I'll start drafting a statement. Something that highlights the issue without turning it into a spectacle. We can also reach out to your network to explore partnerships on diversity and inclusion initiatives." "Do it," Celeste said firmly, the weight of the decision already steady in her mind. "And contact the legal team. I want stricter anti-discrimination clauses drafted for every Parker Holdings subsidiary. This isn't just about preventing lawsuits, it's about setting a standard." "Consider it done," Rachel replied, her confidence unwavering. After a moment, she added quietly, "Celeste, I'm proud of you. You could have let this slide, but you didn't, even when it would have been easier to walk away." Celeste's grip on the phone relaxed slightly, Rachel's words a quiet balm to the weariness pressing at her edges. "Thanks, Rachel. I'll check in later." As the call ended, the car turned onto a quieter street, lined with sprawling estates and manicured hedges. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, dappling the road with gold and shadow. Celeste leaned back against the leather seat, her thoughts drifting as the familiar ache of reflection set in. Being underestimated was nothing new. It had happened in boardrooms, in negotiations, and at gala dinners where she'd been mistaken for someone else entirely. Each moment carried its sting, a quiet reminder of the battles she fought daily, many of them invisible to those around her. "Everything all right, Dr. Parker?" The voice of Marcus, her longtime driver, broke gently through her thoughts. Marcus had been with her for years, his deep voice always tinged with care and respect. Through the rearview mirror, their eyes met briefly. "I'm fine, Marcus. Celeste replied, offering a small, reassuring smile. Just another day. Marcus smiled faintly, his understanding warm and unspoken. Glad to hear it, ma'am. As the car turned into the driveway of her estate, Celeste's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from her older brother, James Parker. Heard about what happened at the terminal. Proud of you, sis. You've always been the one to stand up for what's right. Let me know if you need anything. Celeste's chest tightened with emotion as she read his words. James had always been her rock, his quiet strength a constant presence in her life. From their childhood to now, he'd always believed in her. Even when the world hadn't, his message was more than encouragement. It was a reminder of why she fought so hard. For herself, for her family, and for those who didn't have the same platform. The car came to a gentle stop, and Celeste stepped out, the familiar sight of her estate rising before her. The grand stone facade and sprawling gardens were a far cry from where she had started, but they were the result of decades of hard work, resilience, and unwavering vision. Inside, the warmth of her home wrapped around her, but the weight of the day still lingered. In her office, a sprawling space filled with dark bookshelves and large windows filtering the afternoon light, she settled into her chair. The faint scent of paper and mahogany grounded her as she opened her laptop. Celeste began typing notes to Rachel, ideas for partnerships, organizations they could support, and concrete actions that could drive real change. The possibilities filled the screen, but as her fingers hovered over the keys, she paused. Her mind drifted to the crew, Captain Matthews's stunned silence, Kara's teary regret, and the young attendant Mason's uncomfortable quiet. Celeste didn't relish their downfall, but she hoped the moment would serve as a wake-up call. Not just for them, but for everyone watching. This wasn't about revenge. It was about something bigger, about making sure people learned, grew, and confronted the biases they carried. Closing her laptop, Celeste leaned back in her chair, her resolve solidified, clear and strong. Respect, equality, and accountability weren't luxuries. They were non-negotiable. And until they became the foundation of every space she walked into, Celeste Parker would continue to fight. The evening sun cast a warm golden glow across the sprawling grounds of Dr. Celeste Parker's estate. The well-manicured gardens stretched before her, the flowers and shrubs swaying gently in the evening breeze. Celeste sat on the terrace, her hands cradling a steaming cup of chamomile tea. Though the setting was serene, a quiet oasis removed from the day's turmoil, her mind buzzed with activity, her thoughts circling the events at the private terminal and the larger issues they revealed. Across from her, her older brother, James Parker, leaned back in a wicker chair, his presence calm and reassuring as always. He had arrived unannounced, as he often did, carrying nothing more than his easygoing demeanor and a six-pack of sparkling water, a classic offering for one of their sibling catch-up sessions. "You're too quiet," James said, breaking the silence. He rested an ankle on his opposite knee, his observant gaze fixed on her with the kind of quiet attentiveness only an older brother could manage. "Talk to me, Celeste." Celeste sighed, the weight of the day finally softening her shoulders. "It's not the first time something like this has happened," she admitted, her voice low but steady. "But every time it does, I can't help but wonder, how much can one person really change?" James nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to the horizon where the orange glow of the sun met the distant city skyline. "You've been changing things your whole life, Celeste, whether you realize it or not." Celeste offered a faint smile, appreciating the sentiment, but her thoughts remained heavy. "I can fire a crew. I can put policies in place," she said, tracing the rim of her teacup with her fingers. "But does that really shift the needle? Or does it just push the problem somewhere else?" James leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Listen to me, little sister," he said, his voice firm yet kind. "You're not just anyone making these decisions. You're Dr. Celeste Parker. When you take action, people notice. They talk, they reflect, and sometimes that's all it takes to start a ripple effect." Celeste's gaze dropped to her hands as she absorbed his words. After a long pause, she asked quietly, "But what about the people who don't have the platform I do? The ones who are dismissed, silenced, because no one's there to listen?" "That's exactly why you're doing this," James replied, his voice steady with conviction. "It's not just for you. It's for them, You're building something bigger than yourself, something that lasts. His words hung in the air between them, a quiet affirmation of the purpose she carried. Celeste took a sip of her tea, allowing its warmth to ground her. She nodded faintly, her voice soft but resolute. You're right, it's bigger than me. Later that evening, Celeste retreated to her office. The room was a sanctuary, with dark wood shelves filled with books and a pair of tall windows that framed the night sky. The soft hum of the city was a distant murmur outside as she settled into the leather chair at her mahogany desk. Opening her laptop, the glow of the screen illuminated her face as her fingers flew across the keys. She composed a concise but powerful email to Rachel Monroe, her executive assistant. The subject line read, "Expanding our reach." Rachel, let's not stop at bias training and internal policy reviews. I want to create a broader initiative, a platform that actively promotes diversity, inclusion, and accountability across industries, not just within Parker Holdings. Start by reaching out to organizations we've partnered with in the past. Let's host a summit, something that brings together leaders, advocates, and voices from marginalized communities. I want actionable solutions, not just discussions. Also, let's set aside a fund for scholarships and mentorship programs. People need tangible paths forward. Let's make this count. Celeste? Satisfied, she hit send and leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. The vision in her mind was beginning to take shape, but she knew this was only the first step. This wasn't just about fixing a single incident. It was about reshaping the culture that allowed such behavior to occur in the first place. As the night deepened, Celeste's thoughts drifted back to the faces of the crew, Captain Matthew's visible discomfort, Kara's tearful regret, and the silent unease in the young attendant, Mason. She didn't relish their embarrassment. Accountability wasn't about revenge, after all, but she hoped the experience had opened their eyes. Still, a lingering question gnawed at the edge of her mind. Had they truly learned anything? Or would they carry their biases with them into the next chapter of their lives, unchanged and unchallenged? Turning to her journal, a habit she had maintained since her college days, Celeste opened to a fresh page and began to write. Accountability is only the first step. True change requires understanding, an internal reckoning with the biases we carry, whether we're aware of them or not. I can hold people accountable, but can I help them see what needs to change within themselves? Is there a way to bridge the gap between consequence and growth? Her pen hovered over the page as she paused, staring at the words. The answer wasn't clear yet, but she knew the question itself mattered. Change wasn't easy. It was slow, uncomfortable, and filled with resistance. But it was necessary. The next morning, Celeste's vision began to gain momentum. Rachel had responded with enthusiasm, and her team was already compiling a list of potential partners for the initiative. The idea of a summit, a gathering of leaders and advocates, was met with excitement, and conversations were starting to unfold. As Celeste reviewed the early proposals over her coffee, she felt a flicker of hope. The summit would be a massive undertaking, but it would be worth it. It wouldn't just create a space for conversations, it would lay the groundwork for tangible change. Celeste's gaze drifted to the morning light streaming through her window. For too long, spaces of power and privilege had been shaped by unconscious bias and exclusion. But she wasn't just reacting to a moment anymore. She was building a legacy. One act at a time, one conversation at a time. Dr. Celeste Parker was determined to leave the world better than she found it. By late afternoon, Dr. Celeste Parker sat at her desk, her focus centered on the summit plans unfolding in front of her. Her office, with its rich mahogany furniture and soft golden light streaming through tall windows, had always been her place of clarity. Outside, the muted hum of Larkhill City formed a steady backdrop, but the atmosphere inside was charged with purpose. As she reviewed the latest proposals for the Diversity and Inclusion Initiative, her assistant Rachel Monroe entered quietly, placing an unmarked envelope on her desk. "This came for you, Celeste," Rachel said curiously. "No return address." Celeste glanced up briefly, intrigued. "Thank you, I'll look at it." When Rachel left, Celeste picked up the envelope. It was crisp and clean, and the lack of a sender heightened her curiosity. She unfolded the single sheet of paper within, her eyes catching the careful, neat handwriting. "Dear Dr. Parker, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I felt compelled to write. I was at the terminal yesterday when everything happened. I saw how the crew treated you, and I saw how you stood your ground. I've worked in this industry for over a decade, and I've seen things that made me question why I stay. But watching you hold them accountable gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It reminded me that change is possible, even in places where it feels impossible. Thank you for showing us what strength looks like. Sincerely, a witness. Celeste stared at the letter for a long moment, her heart swelling with unexpected emotion. It was such a small thing, a note from someone she would likely never meet, but it struck her deeply. This anonymous voice was a quiet validation of the path she was carving out, a reminder that even the smallest ripple of action could touch lives in ways she might never see. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the top drawer of her desk, placing it there like a promise, both to herself and to others. Straightening in her chair, Celeste turned her attention back to the work at hand. There was so much to do, but this letter gave her the renewed sense of purpose she needed to keep going. The sunlight streaming through the windows grew softer as the day waned, its warm hues spilling across the room. Celeste refocused, diving into the stack of proposals prepared overnight. Rachel and her team had been thorough, presenting a list of potential partners ranging from grassroots organizations advocating for marginalized communities to corporate allies committed to equitable practices. Yet, as Celeste reviewed the files, a sense of incompleteness lingered. There was something missing, something deeper and more transformative. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, her voice calm and steady. Rachel entered, her sharp efficiency reflected in her tailored suit and the sleek tablet in her hands. Despite her professional exterior, she offered Celeste a warm smile as she settled into the chair opposite her desk. "Good morning, Celeste," Rachel began, placing the tablet on the desk. "I wanted to review the preliminary ideas for the summit. We've already received interest from a few key players." Celeste gestured for her to proceed, leaning forward with quiet focus. Rachel swiped through her notes. The Equity Advancement Network is interested in co-hosting the event, which could significantly boost visibility. They've also suggested including a panel featuring individuals who've experienced discrimination in professional spaces. It would add a real human element to the discussion. Celeste rested her elbows on the desk, her fingers steepled in thought. "It's a good start," she said after a moment. "But I don't want this to turn into yet another event where people share their stories, everyone applauds, and nothing changes. We need action, commitments, something tangible." Rachel nodded thoughtfully, considering this. "What if we set measurable goals for participating organizations?" she suggested. "They could pledge to hire and promote a certain percentage of underrepresented individuals within a defined time frame." Celeste's eyes lit up, and a determined smile spread across her face. "Now we're getting somewhere. Let's take it a step further. Offer resources to help organizations meet those goals. Mentorship programs, training initiatives, and access to networks that can support long-term change." Rachel quickly jotted down notes, her pen moving efficiently across her notepad. "That's exactly what this industry needs," she said with growing excitement. "Less talk, more tools." The conversation continued to flow, their ideas building on one another. Celeste emphasized the importance of accessibility, not just for executives and leaders, but for employees at all levels, especially those from marginalized communities. She wanted the summit to amplify voices that were often unheard, ensuring that their perspectives shaped the discussions and solutions. Rachel scrolled through her tablet, pausing briefly. "There's one more thing," she said hesitantly. "We've received several media inquiries about the incident at the terminal. Some outlets are asking for a comment." Celeste's expression hardened slightly, her jaw setting with resolve. "I'm not interested in making this about me," she said firmly. "This isn't about headlines or sound bites. It's about addressing the larger problem. We'll respond, but keep it focused on the initiative. Let the work speak louder than the incident." Rachel nodded, her expression serious and understanding. "Understood. I'll prepare a neutral statement that shifts the focus to the broader goals of the summit." "Good," Celeste said, her voice steady but resolute. "This is bigger than a single moment. We're not just reacting, we're building something real. As Rachel left the office, Celeste sat back in her chair, her thoughts already racing with the possibilities. The letter from the witness lingered in her mind, a reminder of how much her actions mattered. The summit wasn't just an event. It was an opportunity to lay the foundation for systemic change, to turn conversations into commitments and intentions into action. Outside, the hum of the city remained steady, but inside Celeste's office, the air vibrated with purpose. The quiet letter in her desk drawer and the plans on her screen were small beginnings, but they represented something far larger. Dr. Celeste Parker wasn't just confronting bias, she was building a movement, one with the power to ripple outward, inspiring others to believe that change was not only possible, but necessary. The afternoon sun poured through the expansive glass windows of Parker Dynamics headquarters, casting long reflections on the sleek marble floors. The building, with its modern design and towering facade, stood as a symbol of Dr. Ford, Celeste Parker's success and vision. Yet, as she walked through its halls, Celeste wasn't thinking about grandeur or the empire she had built. Her thoughts were on the people who kept it running. Arriving unannounced at the company's staff lounge, she drew surprised glances from employees gathered around small tables, chatting over coffee and snacks. Unlike the executive suites upstairs, this space was modest and warm, a reflection of the people who truly made the company what it was. A young woman near the back rose suddenly from her chair. "Dr. Parker," she exclaimed, her tone a mix of surprise and awe. "We didn't expect to see you here." Celeste smiled, raising her hand in a calming gesture. "Please sit," she said warmly, motioning for her to remain seated. "I just wanted to stop by and hear from all of you. Your thoughts, your ideas, whatever's on your mind." For a moment, silence hung in the air, hesitation keeping the room still. Then, like ripples in still water, voices began to rise. The employees slowly opened up, sharing their experiences, the good and the bad. Some spoke of opportunities they had been given at Parker Dynamics that they hadn't found elsewhere. Others hesitated, carefully recounting moments when they felt overlooked or misunderstood. The honesty was raw and real, and Celeste listened intently, her calm expression inviting their trust. Finally, an older maintenance worker named Henry, his uniform neat but well-worn, spoke up. He shifted slightly in his seat before looking up, his voice steady, yet tinged with quiet emotion. "Ma'am," he said, his words deliberate, "it means a lot that you're here. It shows you care. But sometimes I wonder, do the people making the decisions up top really see what it's like down here? You can have all the policies in the world, but if the culture doesn't change, nothing else will." Celeste felt Henry's words resonate deeply, striking a chord that had been playing in her mind since the incident at the terminal. She met his gaze, her voice thoughtful but resolute. "You're absolutely right, Henry," she replied. "Culture isn't built in boardrooms. It's built right here, in spaces like this. And that's exactly what we need to address." The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the air cool as Celeste stood on the terrace of her estate. A light sweater draped over her shoulders, and a steaming mug of black coffee rested between her hands, its warmth spreading through her fingers. The gardens below, still glistening with dew, were alive with birdsong, but her thoughts were far from the serene scene in front of her. Today marked a critical moment, the first formal planning meeting for the summit, a tangible step toward the vision she had been consumed by since the confrontation at the terminal. Beneath her outward calm, Celeste felt a nervous energy. This summit couldn't be just a symbolic gesture. It needed to be real, meaningful, and transformative. By mid-morning, the Parker Dynamics boardroom buzzed with quiet anticipation. The space, with its polished oak table and glass accents, reflected the success of a company built on vision and determination. Today, though, it wasn't just about corporate goals. It was about creating lasting change. Key members of the leadership team, along with a group of outside consultants specializing in diversity and inclusion, filled the room. At the head stood Rachel Monroe, her tablet in hand as her sharp gaze scanned the attendees, ensuring everything was in place. When Celeste entered, Rachel gave her a reassuring nod. Celeste stepped to the head of the table, her posture straight, her voice calm but commanding. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her tone carrying both warmth and authority. "As you know, This initiative isn't just another corporate project. It's personal. It's something I've lived through, something I've fought against. And now, it's something I'm determined to change, not just here at Parker Dynamics, but wherever we can make an impact." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the group. Celeste allowed the pause to linger, ensuring she had their full attention before continuing. "This summit," she said firmly, "isn't about me, and it isn't about this company. It's about creating a platform where voices that have been ignored or dismissed can finally be heard. It's about ensuring we don't just talk about change, we make it happen." Rachel stepped forward, taking her cue. Swiping on her tablet, she projected a document onto the screen at the front of the room. "We've outlined 3 key pillars for the summit," she explained: education, accountability, and action. Rachel continued, her voice confident and clear. "Under these pillars, we'll host panels, workshops, and roundtable discussions. We'll invite leaders, advocates, and, most importantly, those directly impacted by systemic bias to share their expertise and experiences." A middle-aged consultant named Elaine Turner, with silver streaks in her dark hair, raised her hand. "The structure looks strong," she began thoughtfully, "but how do we ensure that this isn't just another event where people share stories, applaud, and move on? How do we make the outcomes tangible?" Celeste nodded, appreciating the question. "That's exactly what we need to avoid," she said. "We'll ask participating organizations to commit to measurable goals, whether it's hiring more underrepresented individuals, creating mentorship programs, or offering training initiatives. And we won't leave them to figure it out alone. We'll provide resources and tools to help them meet those commitments." Elaine smiled, clearly satisfied. "If we can accomplish that, this could be groundbreaking." Rachel added, "We'll also focus on making the summit accessible, not just for executives, but for employees at every level. Everyone needs to be part of this conversation." As the meeting continued, the room buzzed with ideas and energy. Solutions were proposed, challenges discussed, and strategies refined. It was clear to Celeste that this was no longer just her vision. It was becoming a collective mission. When the meeting ended, Celeste felt a quiet sense of optimism. The plans were taking shape, but more importantly, the momentum was building. People were beginning to see what was possible. As she stood by the window overlooking the city skyline, Celeste thought back to Henry's words from the day before. "If the culture doesn't change, nothing else will." He was right. Culture didn't shift overnight, but it could be reshaped through action, accountability, and a refusal to accept the status quo. And as long as Dr. Celeste Parker had a voice, she would make sure that change didn't just start, it would endure. Later that afternoon, Celeste walked through the halls of Parker Dynamics with deliberate steps. Her path led her to the employee lounge, where a small group of interns sat gathered around a table, absorbed in a quiet conversation. When they looked up and saw her, surprise flashed across their faces. "Dr. Parker?" one of the interns said, quickly rising to their feet. "What brings you here?" Celeste smiled warmly, motioning for them to stay seated. "I wanted to hear from all of you," she said, her tone inviting. "You're the future of this company, and your voices matter. What do you think we can do better to create a more inclusive workplace?" The interns exchanged glances, clearly surprised by the question. After a moment, a young woman named Nia Thompson spoke up, her voice careful but sincere. "Honestly," she began, "it's inspiring to see you take this so seriously. But sometimes it feels like the changes happen at the top, and we're not sure how they trickle down to us." Celeste nodded thoughtfully, her expression open and understanding. "That's a fair point. Change has to happen at every level, and that includes creating spaces where you feel empowered to speak up." She paused before asking, "What would help you feel more connected to these efforts?" Nia hesitated, then said, "Maybe a mentorship program? Something that pairs interns with leaders in the company who can guide us and help us grow." Celeste smiled warmly, appreciating the idea. "I love that," she said. "Consider it done." The conversation flowed naturally after that, with the interns sharing their ideas and experiences. By the time Celeste left, she felt a renewed sense of clarity. The summit was just one part of the puzzle, but true, lasting change required listening, not just to leaders and experts, but to everyone who contributed to the company's fabric. The summit hall was a breathtaking sight. Towering glass walls allowed sunlight to flood the vast space, creating shimmering patterns on the polished marble floor. Rows of chairs, interspersed with sleek tables, faced a stage framed by cascading greenery, a symbol of growth and renewal. Banners with the summit's name, Voices of Action, hung elegantly from the ceiling, their deep blue background and bold lettering exuding quiet strength. Backstage, Celeste took a deep breath, her heart steady but her thoughts racing with purpose. Beyond the curtain, the hall buzzed with over 1,000 attendees, leaders from various industries, advocates, academics, and voices that had been historically sidelined. This was it. The moment where the months of planning and her years of experience culminated into something real. Rachel appeared beside her, offering a reassuring smile. "Ready?" Celeste nodded. "Let's do this." As she stepped onto the stage, the room fell into a hush. Her heels clicked softly against the wooden platform, but the sound was soon absorbed by the silence of the audience, every eye on her. Standing tall at the podium, Celeste took a moment to scan the room, her gaze lingering on the diverse faces before her. The lights in the hall dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd as Celeste stepped onto the stage. Each of her footsteps was deliberate, echoing softly through the room as thousands of pairs of eyes turned toward her. She approached the podium, pausing for a moment to let the weight of the occasion settle. "Good morning," Celeste began, her voice resonant, carrying effortlessly through the vast space. "Today is more than just a gathering, it's a call to action. A chance to confront uncomfortable truths and commit to meaningful change." She scanned the audience, letting her gaze rest on the faces before her. Leaders, advocates, professionals, and young changemakers, each of them reflecting a mix of curiosity, determination, and cautious hope. "For too long," Celeste continued, "we've lived in systems that silence certain voices while amplifying others. We've allowed biases, whether conscious or unconscious, to dictate who belongs and who does not. But today, we say, enough. Today, we begin to rebuild." Her words hung in the air, heavy with purpose. She took a deep breath before continuing, sharing her story, not just the incident at the private terminal, but a lifetime of experiences. "When I was dismissed and belittled at the terminal, it wasn't new," she said, her tone measured yet unwavering. "But what I realized in that moment was that my story wasn't unique. It was part of a larger pattern, a narrative that repeats itself across countless lives and countless places. And that's why we're here today. To break that pattern, to create something better." The audience remained silent, fully absorbed. Celeste had their attention, not because of her authority or title, but because of the truth she spoke. The rest of the day unfolded with an electric energy. Panels featured voices from all walks of life, individuals sharing stories of triumph and struggle that echoed through the hall and into the hearts of those listening. There were tears, applause, and nods of agreement as people spoke about challenges they had faced and the courage it took to overcome them. In workshops, attendees were encouraged to challenge their assumptions, explore their biases, and learn ways to dismantle them, both within their organizations and themselves. Discussions about accountability turned into actionable steps, with leaders signing pledges to implement diversity programs, mentorship opportunities, and equitable hiring practices. One of the most profound moments came during a roundtable discussion featuring young professionals, including Nia Thompson, the intern Celeste had spoken to weeks before. Nia's voice was steady but passionate as she shared her vision for the future. "I want a workplace," Nia said, her words clear and strong, "where every person, no matter where they come from or what they look like, feels seen, valued, and empowered. It's not just about diversity, it's about dignity." The room erupted into a standing ovation, the power of her words lingering like an echo. From the audience, Celeste watched Nia with pride, her heart swelling. This was what she had envisioned, a space where voices that had been overlooked could take center stage and reshape the conversation. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting golden hues through the hall's glass walls, the summit concluded with a closing reception. Attendees mingled, their conversations alive with ideas, plans, and newfound determination. Celeste moved through the crowd, stopping to speak with leaders, advocates, and participants. She thanked them for their contributions, listening intently as they shared their hopes for what this summit had sparked. Toward the end of the evening, Celeste found herself face to face with Mariana Torres, the consultant whose insight had been instrumental throughout the planning process. Mariana held up her glass, a warm smile spreading across her face. "To a future built on action," Mariana said, her voice full of conviction. Celeste smiled, clinking her glass lightly against Mariana's. "To a future where no one is silenced." That night, as Celeste returned home, a profound sense of accomplishment settled over her. Yet she knew this was just the beginning. The summit had planted seeds of accountability, awareness, and action, but it would take time, effort, and vigilance to nurture them into lasting change. Settling into her office, she opened her journal, a place where she had always turned to reflect. The soft glow of the lamp cast light on the pages as she began to write. Reflection. Today I saw what's possible when people come together with open hearts and open minds. I saw courage in the stories that were shared, determination in the commitments that were made, and hope in the eyes of those who have been waiting for this moment. But this isn't the end. Change is a journey, not a destination. We've taken the first step, but there's so much more to do. I will keep listening, keep learning, and keep fighting. Because the world we're building, the one where respect, inclusion, and equity are non-negotiable, is worth it. Setting her pen down, Celeste leaned back in her chair, a small but genuine smile gracing her lips. Outside her window, the night was calm, the stars scattered like seeds across the sky. They were small, but together they illuminated the darkness, a quiet reminder that even the smallest lights could spark something greater. This journey, Celeste knew, was far from over, but as long as she had a voice, she would keep planting seeds of change, one conversation, one action, and one moment at a time. What began as a moment of prejudice had transformed into something far more powerful, a movement for accountability, dignity, and respect. This story was no longer about a single person. It was about the change we can inspire when we choose to stand up against injustice. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss more inspiring stories like this one. Together, let's amplify voices that matter and create a world where everyone is valued.